Hi sleepyheads, welcome back to Koala Moon. Tonight we've got a collection of calming bedtime stories where our friends learn to follow their dreams and go on wonderful adventures. Let's get cozy and drift off together. Before we do, could you please tap subscribe? By doing this small thing, you'll let YouTube know you love what we do, which will help us grow. Let's get ourselves cozy, snuggle down, and I'll begin. This is The Kiwi Who Dreamed of the Sky by Susanna McLaughlin. In a vast green forest, on a little island far away in a shining ocean, lived a little bird named Tia. Tia wasn't just any bird. She was a kiwi. Kiwis are about the size of a small chicken, with plump, pear-shaped bodies covered in fuzzy, tufty, grey-speckled fur. They're very cuddly little things that look like pom-poms, perched atop two little stilt-like legs. They have long, thin beaks, perfect for poking in holes and nibbling seeds. But what makes the kiwi bird the most unusual is that they don't have any wings. They don't fly, you see, preferring to toddle around in the underbrush, finding the nuts and fruits that tumble from the tallest trees. Tia was an exceptionally feathery kiwi, which is really saying something. She was like a ball of fluff, with two kind brown eyes and a smiling beak, and exceptionally large feet. She used these to run, whizzing around the forest at night, singing as she went. She was a little explorer, running from bush to bush, seeking other birds and creatures to play with. She had been raised under a tall fern tree in the heart of the forest, and once she became fully grown and left the burrow, she'd begun to explore further. She would tootle about the clearing at first, nervously darting from behind her mum's legs and smelling all the new smells of the rainforest. Little by little, with support from her mum, Tia became braver and more adventurous, and soon she was old enough to put on her sun hat and head out on her own explorations. Now, Tia had gotten to know every inch of the forest. She would dig a new burrow every day with her strong feet, snoozing through the sunlight hours. She would emerge at dusk to explore new clearings, marvelling at the growth of the saplings, nibbling at the offerings of the towering trees, watching the stars, or dancing her splish-splash dance in the rain. The stars were amazing in the forest. You could see so many of them between the trees that the whole sky glowed misty white. Sometimes Tia would plop down on her round bottom and look for shapes in the constellations. At forest school, when she was a child, she had been too busy learning about the trees, flowers, and delicious foods of the rainforest to learn about the constellations all the way up in the sky. So she'd made up her own, spotting patterns in the stars for herself. There was a crescent-shaped cluster to the east that she thought looked like a dolphin jumping from the water. One to the south that she thought twisted into the twirly-whirly shape of a fern's new leaf, and one right overhead that was round and friendly-looking that she thought was a kiwi, just like her. The forest offered Tia endless opportunities to play. The ground was covered with spongy moss to bounce on, and crisscrossed with rocky paths which made perfect racetracks. There were sparkling waterfalls to swim in, and birds to chatter with. She loved talking to all kinds of birds, even the tuis, who she could barely understand. The tuis have gleaming dark feathers that shimmer in beautiful jewel tones in the moonlight, and the smartest little ball of white feathers tucked under their chins. They are very sophisticated-looking birds, but they talk in the most unusual robotic voices, babbling and burbling to each other, with whistles and crackles between their words. Tia barely knew what they were talking about, but she would giggle along with them anyway, enjoying their funny company. The forest was so big it seemed endless to Tia, especially since the trees were so very tall. The tallest palm trees and fan-like ferns seemed to tower so far above her head that Tia felt tiny tucked up in her little burrow. She would zoom around from clearing to clearing all night and spend her days snoozing underground, enjoying the warm sun that trickled into her cozy spot in the undergrowth. One day, Tia awoke with a yawn, opening her beak wide and stretching her feathers. She blinked a few times and emerged into the dusk, whilst the rest of the forest was winding down for bedtime. Above her, a tui bird was perched on a branch, singing his funny song. Tia called up a cheery hello. The tui looked down at her and wished her a good evening. He said she had caught him just as he was about to take his nighttime flight, before he settled down in his nest for sleep. At least, Tia thought that was what he said. Tia beamed up at him. The stars must look amazing from up there. Can you say hello to the constellations for me? There's a Kiwi up there who I sometimes talk to, but I'm not sure she can hear little me chattering from all the way down here. The tui giggled and said he would, spreading his gleaming wings and soaring into the sky, until all Tia could see was the little white tuft on his neck, disappearing amongst the stars. Tia sank down onto the soil and wondered what the tui must see from up there. He could probably see the whole forest, stretched far and wide over the hills towards the sea. Maybe he could see the town where the people live, and the sea, and mountains beyond. Tia closed her eyes and imagined it. If only she could take a flight too and see the world from the sky. Even humans could fly in the little metal contraptions she saw soaring overhead from time to time. Why couldn't a Kiwi? Tia knew who she could ask. She called out for her friend Nico, who lived at the foot of a tall and spindly palm tree in the next clearing to the one she found herself in. She let out a calling of Kiwi, Kiwi, and soon heard heavy little feet padding through the undergrowth towards her. Nico was an old Kiwi who had lived in the forest since long before Tia was born. She often came to him with questions such as this one. Nico had the sparkle of wisdom in his eye, and his fur was greyer than most, so Tia knew his answers were always right. Why can't Kiwis fly? She asked Nico. Nico explained to Tia that many, many years ago, a very brave and honourable Kiwi had given up his right to fly in order to look after the forest floor, and this is why Kiwis had no wings. Tia puffed her chest in pride. She was very good at looking after the forest floor. She was proud of having no wings. Besides, who needed wings when you could run as fast as her? But she would love to see what the other birds could see from the sky. Nico smiled wisely. You don't need wings to see the world from the sky, Tia, he said. Think of the parrots who live in the mountains. Yes, they can soar on the wind, but their very favourite view of the world is from the comfort of their nests on the mountain tops, where your feet could be firmly on the ground as you look out at the world below you. Tia thought for a moment. But how would I get up the mountains without wings? She asked Nico. Nico chuckled. With your sturdy, speedy feet, of course, he told her. He told Tia to wait for a moment and retreated to his burrow, nestled behind a kawa bush. She heard the ruffling of paper and a couple of thuds from within his burrow as Nico searched through his belongings. He was muttering to himself as he searched. Eventually, Tia heard the "aha," which meant Nico had found what he was looking for. Tia saw Nico's long beak emerge from the bushes, followed by his furry body. He was clutching a roll of parchment between his toes. He rolled it out and Tia took in the markings. She pointed to a sketch of trees. That's the forest, she said. And a swathe of blue. That's the ocean. She pointed to a collection of houses. That's the town. And a big, jagged mountain range. There they are. Nico nodded. Follow the map, he said, and you'll be able to see the view from the sky, too. And do say hello to the friends you meet along the way. There's a lot of friendly, feathery folk out there, and some not so feathery, too. Tia smiled. She was no stranger to missions and quests, but this would be the first to lead her out of the forest. Tia stretched her legs, put on her beige bucket hat, and packed some berries and the map into her adventure bag. She strapped her bag across her body and wished Nico a good evening as she headed off on her adventure. For a long while, Tia ambled through the quiet of the forest, past the trickling creek and through the greenest moss. It was a warm, calm evening, and she smiled and whistled to herself as she went. She hopped across the waterfall pool, from stone to stone, and weaved between the prehistoric-looking ferns and the wide, smooth trunks of kauri trees. She took a couple of detours, following funny sounds and friendly birds, and stopping for a quick bite to eat with a fluffy little bat. But after a long night, a day's nap, and another evening, Tia reached the edge of the forest. Before her stretched hilly fields and a long, winding country road. She walked through the long grass beside the road, pausing to chat with some friendly cows. They had curly fur in dark amber and black, with stripes of white across their bellies, and they blinked their long eyelashes and munched sleepily on the grass below their feet. The cows mooed low hellos to Tia and plodded over to the fence to greet her. They thought it was unusual to see a kiwi outside of the forest. The cows lowered their big heads and pricked their wide, furry ears as Tia explained to them her mission. Many of the cows had visited the foothills of the mountains, spending sleepy summer days grazing on the long, dry mountain grass, but they'd never been in the forest. The grass there wasn't so green and delicious, and this was what cows valued above all else. Tia explained the variety of nuts and seeds they had in the forest, and she offered the cows some to try, but they kindly shook their big heads, insisting nothing could be more delicious to them than fresh, dewy grass. They wished Tia a happy journey and watched her with their big brown eyes as she scuttled away, heading towards the mountain. Before long, Tia reached the town. It was quiet and dark, and Tia stopped her whistling, enjoying the sleepy air and not wanting to wake anyone snoozing nearby. All the humans would be asleep by now, tucked up tight in their beds. As she wandered through the town, she met a little fantail who just couldn't sleep. The tiny, fairy-like bird with the fanning peacock-like tail was flitting from left to right, twirling and fluttering from hedge to hedge, branch to branch. She danced on the breeze around Tia's head, inviting her to play chase through the gardens. Tia whizzed after the little bird, giggling and chuckling as she continuously evaded her grasp. Tia jumped into the air, trying to tag the little bird, but she always expertly flitted out of reach at the very last minute. Soon, the two collapsed into the grass, grinning at one another. Once she'd caught her breath, the fantail said goodnight to Tia and flew away to her nest. Tia continued on her journey, weaving from garden to garden, rustling through the bushes, smelling sweet tropical flowers here and there. She paused on the lawn at one house, looking up at a particularly tasty-smelling bird feeder. As she stood there, gazing up at the delicious seeds hanging way overhead, a light clicked on. She stood in the grass, enjoying its warm glow, and before long, two children came to the window, peeking out at her with excited smiles. Two dogs soon followed, pressing their noses against the glass. Tia gave them a friendly smile and squeaked a Kiwi, and they waved back happily. A few gardens down, Tia noticed some fruit hanging from a trellis overhead. It grew on a twisting vine, and as she watched, one fell and rolled to her feet. Tia inspected the fruit with wonder. It was brown and fuzzy, and looked rather familiar. In fact, it looked just like her. She gave it a nibble with her beak and found bright green tangy flesh dotted with sour black seeds. It was delicious, and she savoured the fruit, saying a thank you into the air intended for their gardener. She ate half of the slightly squashed fruit and put the rest in her satchel for later. After the delicious snack, she laid out on her back for a short while and poked her feet in the air, giving them a rest after they'd carried her so far. She looked at the map as she lay there. She wasn't far from the mountains now. As the sun began to rise, she could see them glistening in the distance. This made her too excited for her usual nap, and she put her sun hat on her head and set off on the path towards the sky. As she left the town, she crossed a creek. On the bank, enjoying the morning rays, laid a dragon. At least, Tia thought it was a dragon. The creature had leathery green skin and gleaming eyes, and a wide smile. It was a toothless, friendly smile. Small white spikes went down the ridge of his back and along his wide pointed tail. He had wide splayed feet, and he barely moved, stretched out on his belly, totally relaxed. Tia flopped down beside him and wished him a good morning. He wished her a good morning in return. He spoke very slowly, as if in slow motion, and moved his head slowly to smile at her. He introduced himself as Tua, and said it was short for Tuatara. Tia introduced herself and complimented him on his impressive name. He inquired about her journey. When Tia told him that she had come from the forest, Tua smiled. "So, you know Nico, the wise old Kiwi of the forest." Tia nodded and told him proudly that Nico was a good friend of hers. Tua told her that Nico had passed this way many years ago on an adventure, wearing a funny hat and a little satchel just like her. Tia wasn't surprised. Kiwis were an adventurous sort. Tua told her that Nico had been coming down the mountain when they met, and that he told Tua that he had made friends with an alpine parrot who had shown him the way. He told Tia that all she needed to do to call the bird was coo Kia into the air. That was how the alpine parrots called to one another. Tia thanked Tua and gave him the remainder of the tangy green fruit from her satchel, which he accepted happily. He told Tia that the humans called these kiwi fruit, as they looked so much like the little bird. Tia was tickled pink to learn that the humans loved kiwi birds so much that they dedicated such a delicious fruit to them. Tua munched the kiwi fruit contentedly as he waved Tia off onto the path that led up the mountain. Before long, Tia found herself padding up the path into the clouds. She was so excited that she skipped and hopped every other step for a while, skipping and hopping more and more often until she eventually burst into a run. She looked like a cloud herself, whizzing along the path towards the sky. She weaved through the feet of a couple of hikers in a blur of feathers. Before long, Tia was in the shelter of tall pine trees, hopping over rocks and roots and brushing past shrubs. The little kiwi stopped, panting, in the shade of a fern. She could tell that she was high up here, but all she could see was trees. She looked this way and that, but all she saw was trees. Where was the sky? She needed some special help. She threw back her head and whistled a kia, and before she knew it, a beautiful parrot soared into the clearing. She was feathered in gleaming green, with flashes of vibrant orange underneath each wide wing. She had a hooked beak, the top curling around the bottom, which gave her a cute little smile, adding to the kindness in her green eyes. She swooped down and introduced herself as Kia. "I thought you were Nico, but you're much fluffier and much less silver-haired," Kia said. Tia introduced herself and they shook talons. Kia said she was very pleased to meet Tia, and Tia agreed. Kia and her friends lived in the mountains, swooping from peak to peak, playing games with hikers and trying to nibble on their snacks when they weren't looking. Kia had the strongest, most beautiful wings, which Tia looked at in awe. "You're so lucky you can fly," Tia said. "Well, you're lucky to have such strong feet," Kia replied. "How far you must have climbed to get here. And you're lucky to be small enough to forage in the undergrowth. You must get the most delicious berries of all. Anyway, you're about to see the world from on high too. It's just this way." Kia led Tia through the trees, swooping through the air ahead of her, until they reached the very peak of the mountain. "Just a few steps more," Kia said, "and you'll reach the tippy top of the mountain." Tia thanked Kia with a dazzling smile, and the parrot spread her wings and took off to the sky. It was breathtaking. Tia's home lay spread out beneath her, underneath wisps of white cloud. Ahead of her was the sky, bright blue and vaster than Tia had ever imagined. The forest spread out far into the distance, an endless carpet of green treetops, and hills rippled in the land beyond. The sea sparkled in the distance, and the town looked tiny from here, like the little ant villages in the forest. Tia now knew why her home was called Land of the Long White Cloud. The island expanded in wisps in the sky blue of the ocean. Tia the Kiwi didn't need to fly. No view could be better than this. She plopped down on her bottom and slumped back for a nap. You couldn't do that whilst flying. When she awoke, it was dusk, and the sky had begun to darken with smudges of pink and orange. Before long, the stars came out to twinkle in the sky. The dolphin constellation was visible first, and then the fern, and then the kiwi, right overhead. Tia gazed up at her and smiled. Maybe she was close enough now for the kiwi in the stars to hear her. "Kiwi," she cooed in greeting. And, to her surprise, a response was sung out in the night. Not from above, but from behind her. Tia propped herself up and turned, just as someone emerged from the bush behind her. It was another kiwi, feathers all ruffled and messy, with his own adventure hat, which was similar to a cowboy hat in style, but made in the softest blue felt. He had a satchel slung over his shoulder too, with his own map and snacks bursting from the pockets. He bounded over to Tia and plopped down at her side. "Who needs to fly?" he said merrily, looking out at the view. "When you're adventurous and strong like a kiwi," Tia agreed. "Our feet can take us anywhere, and we get to meet everyone who crosses our path." Tia and her new friend gazed down on the world, pointing out the forest, amazed by how far they had come and about how much they had yet to explore. Cat-stronauts in Candyland by Alicia Ainsley. It had been several months since Captain Puss and her crew of cat-stronauts had found the Milky Way, and not a day had gone by that they hadn't been grateful for their discovery. The space-exploring crew may be more ambitious than most house cats, but they still loved the same things as the cats back on Earth, namely milk. So, spending every day floating around space on the tasty streams of the Milky Way was the perfect existence for the crew. However, Captain Puss was starting to get itchy feet. She was starting to pine for a new adventure. Space was full of never-ending discoveries to be made, and she didn't want to stop at the Milky Way. So, one day, while her crew lazily floated around on the Milky Way stream, she floated over to their rocket ship to do a bit of work. She took off her bulbous helmet and breathed in the fresh air inside the rocket. She sat down at the large computer monitor and engaged the rocket's telescope. She often liked to stargaze, but today she decided to look for something even bigger. Captain Puss was on a mission to find a new, yet-to-be-discovered planet to visit. She pressed the buttons and watched as the telescope kicked into action, bringing up impressive views of outer space on the screen. She zoomed in and in, rotated the telescope, and analysed everything she saw. It all looked very familiar, so she decided to push the telescope even further than she had done before. She zoomed and zoomed until it seemed like the telescope couldn't look any further. But then, Captain Puss paused the screen. Amongst the twinkling stars, beyond the edge of their galaxy, she could see a new one, and in it, she spotted a small, bright pink planet. Captain Puss called for her crew to come immediately. "Look at this!" she cried, pointing at the pink planet on the screen as her curious crew gathered around. A crew member called Smudge squinted his eyes and asked, "What is that, Captain?" Captain Puss smiled and said firmly, "I believe that is a planet. We're going to go there and see what it's like." The crew groaned and moaned a little. They liked it on the Milky Way. They didn't want to leave. But Captain Puss wouldn't listen. It was high time that they moved on somewhere new. What kind of cat-stronauts were they if they just stayed in one place forever? She gave out instructions to her crew, and everyone took up their positions dutifully. When everyone was in place, the captain commanded, "Head towards that pink planet." and the rocket ship took off back into outer space in search of the brand new world. Several days later, the Cat-stronauts' rocket ship touched down on the pink planet's surface with a bounce. To the crew's surprise, the ground was spongy, and their rocket boinged softly a few times before finally settling down. How peculiar, thought Captain Puss-Puss. What could the ground be made of to make it so soft and spongy? After their recent visit to the moon and the discovery that it was in fact made of cheese, Captain Puss-Puss knew that anything was possible. The Cat-stronauts donned their suits and helmets and paraded off the rocket ship to inspect this new pink planet. Smudge instinctively reached down to the floor and picked up a handful of the pink spongy surface. He lifted it to his nose and sniffed. It smelt sweet, almost sickeningly sweet. Then he opened up the flap in his helmet and placed a piece on his tongue. Instantly, Smudge's eyes lit up as he exclaimed, "The ground tastes like sugar." Looking around, Captain Puss-Puss quickly realized why. Ahead of them were giant red and white striped city walls, with huge candy canes at the sides of a gate in its middle. And at the top of the gate was a sign which read, "Welcome to Candyland." The Cat-stronauts all walked towards the gate in awe. From a distance, the shiny, colourful walls looked like marble, but the closer they got, they could see that they were made out of hard candy. Beyond the walls, they could see the tops of regal buildings, with the biggest gumdrops they had ever seen perched on top of the roofs. And as they approached, the scent of sugar was undeniable. The sound of jolly music chimed from within, and the excitable chatter of voices filled the air. Captain Puss-Puss and her crew reached the front gate and wondered what to do next. Should they knock? But their questions were quickly answered when the front gate began to open of its own accord. The Cat-stronauts watched with anticipation as the gates to the city opened up wide to reveal hundreds of Candyland citizens waiting for them on the other side. The citizens' grinning faces welcomed them warmly, and, to the cat's amazement, a giant peanut wearing a golden, ruby-encrusted crown and a red velvet cloak stepped forward with open arms and announced, "Welcome to Candyland, visitors from outer space." All of the Candyland citizens standing behind the giant peanut started to cheer and clap with delight, and Captain Puss-Puss and her crew smiled at each other with disbelief. The Cat-stronauts stepped inside the gates of the city and were immediately swarmed by the unusual citizens who lived on this pink planet. Everybody was so friendly and were clearly very excited to have visitors. The Candyland citizens had numerous questions they wanted to ask the cats, just as many as the Cat-stronauts wanted to ask them. But when the giant peanut in the crown stepped forward, everyone fell silent. "Greetings," the peanut said. "I'm King Peanut Butter, and I rule Candyland. Who is your leader?" Captain Puss-Puss stepped forward, towering over the Peanut King, and replied, "I am, Your Majesty. My name is Captain Puss-Puss, and this is my crew of Cat-stronauts. We saw your pink planet from afar and journeyed for several days to be here. We thank you for your gracious welcome." King Peanut Butter blushed a little and responded, "The honor is all ours, Captain. We have never had visitors from outer space before, so this is a most joyous occasion for us." King Peanut Butter offered to show Captain Puss and her crew around Candyland. They would have the finest tour of everything they wanted to see, and would have all their burning questions answered. Hearing this, Smudge the cat piped up excitedly. "Your Majesty, what is the ground made of?" King Peanut Butter replied nonchalantly, "Why, it's marshmallow, of course." Smudge smiled and whispered, "Of course it is," before picking up another clump of the ground and stuffing it in his mouth. Captain Puss subtly scolded Smudge for his brazen act. The captain gave her crew strict instructions not to eat anything in Candyland unless the king gave them specific permission to. The Cat-stronauts sighed with disappointment, but agreed to their captain's orders. They had heard lots about the tasty delights of sweets and candy back on Earth. The humans seemed to love it, but the cats had never tried it themselves before. As King Peanut Butter led the Cat-stronauts on a guided tour of Candyland, the cats couldn't help but gaze around with longing, licking their lips. Every single thing in Candyland was edible. It was all made up of sugary treats. The buildings, the flowers, the trees. Candyland truly lived up to its name. Captain Puss walked by King Peanut Butter's side and commented, "You have a marvelous world here. It is so impressive." King Peanut Butter smiled proudly. He knew how spectacular Candyland was, and he was very proud of it. King Peanut Butter led the Cat-stronauts through the streets of his colourful, wonderful city and pointed out the remarkable buildings and monuments. Each building was made out of a different type of sweet treat. There was a tall building made of fudge, and a shop created from wobbly jelly that shimmied and shook as they walked past. There was even a hut made out of yellow sponge cake with a whipped cream roof. The whole city was like a wonderland of sweetie goodness. While the buildings were very impressive, the citizens of Candyland were even more fascinating. Every citizen was made out of their own type of candy. The Cat-stronauts said hello to a pair of twin chocolate bars and ordered bubble tea from a friendly donut called Sweetie Pie. The king introduced them to two esteemed royal subjects called Treacle and Chocolate, who were both made out of gingerbread and brownie mix, respectively. And the Cat-stronauts were almost knocked over by a gaggle of excitable, bouncy gumdrop kids racing each other down the street. The king pointed to the forest on the outskirts of the city, where a sleuth of gummy bears lived, and the Cat-stronauts noticed how the leaves on the trees were kernels of fluffy popcorn. Then, to the right of the city, the king pointed to the sea, made out of chocolate milk. Cats don't eat chocolate, they're allergic, but they all laughed at how much the humans from Earth would love to swim in the chocolate sea. They all turned down a side street, and the pavement became bumpy. King Peanut Butter explained that this was the rocky road, and the Cat-stronauts noted how it was made out of chunks of chocolate, biscuits, marshmallow, and raisins. As the king continued their tour gleefully, an unusual-looking citizen appeared around the corner. Unlike the other sweet citizens of Candyland, this one was a tall toothbrush wearing a police officer's hat. King Peanut Butter called out to the tall toothbrush and beckoned them over. "Officer Toothbrush," King Peanut Butter said cheerfully, "please, meet our guests from outer space, Captain Puss and her crew." Officer Toothbrush tipped his hat to the Cat-stronauts and replied in a low, drawling voice, "It's a pleasure to meet you all." King Peanut Butter explained how Officer Toothbrush was an integral member of the city. He kept everyone safe and ensured they were well taken care of, especially their teeth. Officer Toothbrush explained to the Cat-stronauts how it was imperative to take care of their teeth in such a sugar-filled world. It was something he felt very passionate about, and he ensured that the citizens of Candyland abided by the rule of brushing their teeth twice a day. Officer Toothbrush offered them some advice. "Your milky white gnashers won't be as milky white for long if you drink too much from the sherbet waterfall." The Cat-stronauts nodded their heads and agreed with the officer. "Yes, Officer Toothbrush," they chimed, and the officer marched back off down the street to continue carrying out his important duties. Captain Puss turned to King Peanut Butter with intrigue and asked, "What is the sherbet waterfall, Your Highness?" King Peanut Butter's eyes twinkled, and he clapped his hands together with glee. "Oh, it's the most wonderful place in Candyland. I'll take you there next," he said. All of a sudden, the sky changed colour, and everyone around popped up their umbrellas to protect themselves from the falling rain. The king and the Cat-stronauts all dashed for shelter underneath a nearby shop entrance, and Captain Puss noticed that the rain falling from the sky was made out of gooey caramel. Splodges of gloopy golden caramel pooled on the pavement, and citizens attempted to dodge the sweet, sticky substance as they navigated their way down the street. The Cat-stronauts watched on with wonderment until the rain subsided. Every single thing about Candyland was remarkable. When the rain stopped, King Peanut Butter led the Cat-stronaut crew out of the city streets and into an open park area where the blades of grass were made of licorice and tiny jelly beans hopped through the fields like rabbits. In the middle of the park was a huge flowing waterfall made up of pale pink sherbet. The fizzy, sweet powder rolled over the edge of a rocky waterfall made out of chocolate raisins and pooled at the bottom to create a large lake full of sherbety goodness. The Cat-stronauts stopped at the banks of the lake and admired the sherbet waterfall. "This is beautiful," Captain Puss exhaled, and King Peanut Butter smiled with a sense of achievement. Mittens, the Cat-stronaut, whispered to Smudge, "Can we drink it?" Smudge looked at Captain Puss with begging eyes, but the captain shook her head and whispered back, "Only if the king says so." King Peanut Butter checked his watch and turned to Captain Puss and her crew with an air of urgency. "I must be off," he insisted. "I'm due to make a very important royal proclamation in 15 minutes, and I mustn't be late." King Peanut Butter turned to dash off, but then hesitated and turned back to the Cat-stronauts to add, "You should come listen. I think you'll enjoy it. Everyone is congregating outside the palace in 15 minutes. I'll see you there." Then King Peanut Butter rushed off to prepare his royal announcement, leaving the Cat-stronauts alone by the sherbet waterfall. The Cat-stronauts looked between themselves with bafflement. "What are we supposed to do now?" Mittens asked the crew. Looking around at the sherbet waterfall, the chocolatey, muddy banks, and the wafer flowers, Smudge shrugged his kitty shoulders and suggested, "Shall we dig in while no one's watching?" Captain Puss playfully batted Smudge with her paw and rolled her eyes. "We will not be digging into anything," she warned him. "We are going to go to the palace like King Peanut Butter suggested. It will be nice to hear a royal proclamation. I wonder what it is." The Cat-stronauts were eager to go, but they were still a little bit confused. "How are we supposed to know where to go?" Smudge pouted. Captain Puss looked around and noticed several groups of Candyland citizens flocking in the same direction, chatting excitedly. "We follow the crowd," Captain Puss smiled, gesturing to the steady flow of Candyland citizens walking down the nearby street. The Cat-stronauts followed where everyone was going, and eventually came upon the Candyland Palace. It was a tall, pale pink building with turrets made out of Twizzlers and honeycomb on the roofs. A moat full of hundreds and thousands of sugar sprinkles surrounded the castle, and a drawbridge made of peanut butter brittle formed a walkway across the moat from the front door to the land. It seemed like everyone in Candyland had gathered for the King's royal proclamation, and a sea of sugary citizens crowded together in the large square situated at the front of the palace. "I wonder what is going to happen," Mittens whispered with anticipation. At that moment, King Peanut Butter appeared on the palace balcony, and the crowd of citizens cheered and clapped at his arrival. He was obviously beloved by his kingdom. The king lifted his hand to silence the crowd, and then, in his most prominent, most booming voice, he spoke to the people. "Thank you for being here, fellow citizens and esteemed guests. It brings me great pleasure to see you all here today. I have wonderful news to share with you all." Then another peanut in a crown stepped forward. Captain Puss assumed she must be the queen. The queen handed the king a bundle of blankets, and he turned back to the crowd. He peeled back the blankets, and the crowd gasped as they realized what was inside. The king held up to the crowd a teeny tiny baby peanut, and the crowd sighed with adoration. King Peanut Butter announced, "I introduce to you all your new princess, Princess Peanut Buttercup." The crowd erupted with applause and cheered for the new princess. The Cat-stronauts grinned from ear to ear. They couldn't believe how lucky they were. They had visited Candyland on a very momentous day. King Peanut Butter announced that over the next few days there would be a big festival held in celebration of the new princess, and the citizens of Candyland were delighted. The crowd cheered in unison. 3 cheers for the new princess. Hip, hip, hooray! Hip, hip, hooray! Hip, hip, hooray! Captain Puss and the Cat-stronauts couldn't believe their luck. They had landed on this planet at just the right time. The Cat-stronauts decided to stick around in Candyland for a few more days to enjoy the festivities. After all, they had all the time in the world and nowhere they needed to be. After the 3rd day of Candyland festivities, the Cat-stronauts started to feel exhausted. After spending so long in the relaxing Milky Way, lazing around all day every day, they weren't used to partying so much. As much as they liked it here in Candyland, they started to long for the Milky Way again. Captain Puss made the executive decision to head back towards the Milky Way. They had achieved what they had set out to do, and now they could return to their favorite, peaceful spot in space, satisfied. The citizens of Candyland were sad to see the Cat-stronauts go, but they understood. They had lots more planets to discover. As Captain Puss and her crew prepared their rocket ship to leave, King Peanut Butter and the citizens of Candyland gathered outside of the city gates to wave them off. The king gestured to the Gumdrop Kids to step forward, and the little green balls rushed forward carrying baskets and hampers full of lots of sweet treats. King Peanut Butter told the Cat-stronauts, "Here are some Candyland treats to take with you back into space. We hope you enjoy them as much as we enjoyed having you here." Smudge's face lit up, and he gratefully took 2 hampers of sweets, declaring, "Oh, we will, King Peanut Butter. Thank you. We've heard so much from the people on Earth about how delicious this stuff is. We can't wait to try it for ourselves." The Cat-stronauts loaded the rocket up with gifts from Candyland, and Captain Puss thanked King Peanut Butter once more for his hospitality. They shook hands like good friends, and then parted ways. Captain Puss climbed aboard the rocket with her crew and prepared for blast-off. As the Cat-stronauts' rocket ship jetted off into space, King Peanut Butter and the friendly citizens of Candyland waved them off until they were fully out of sight. It didn't take long for the Cat-stronauts to dig into the hampers of delicious sweet treats. They all snacked on the delectable selection of lollipops, cookies, cakes and sweeties with joy. Smudge eventually laid back with a full belly and declared, "I think Candyland is my favourite planet we've discovered so far." Captain Puss smiled amusedly and added, "And just think, there are so many more incredible, unique planets still to discover." Mittens licked a bright blue lollipop from her chair and replied, "I hope we find a planet made up of scratching posts. The Cat-stronauts all giggled and excitedly discussed the types of planets they would like to find, while Captain Puss watched through the computer screen as the tiny pink planet of Candyland gradually disappeared out of sight. She smiled contentedly and said to her crew, "Well, you'll like the next place we're heading to. Here we can relax and unwind for a while after such a busy few days in Candyland. And there's plenty of milk to drink, to our heart's content." The Cat-stronauts looked at each other excitedly and cheered all together. "We're going back to the Milky Way." Captain Puss set the course and sat back in her captain's chair, feeling fulfilled. A trip back to the Milky Way would be a welcome reprieve after so much excitement. Plus, she had heard that milk goes very well with cookies. This is Koko and Kookai Hit the Slopes by Alicia Ainsley. It had been a long time since the koalas had enjoyed a big family holiday together. With everyone living all over the world, it could be hard to get everyone together in one place at the same time. But this winter season, everybody had made the effort to set some time aside to meet up for a fun-filled family vacation in the snowy mountains of New Zealand. Everyone was excited for the trip in their own different ways. Auntie Shirley was looking forward to doing a spot of hiking. Koko's parents and his sister Kira were particularly interested in exploring the towns at the bottom of the mountains, and Koko couldn't wait to grab his snowboard and hit the slopes. Meanwhile, Koko's young cousin, Kookai, had never been on holiday before, and she was simply looking forward to experiencing everything. She hoped that she would get to meet the local wildlife, admire the beautiful snowy mountains, and maybe make some new friends. But she especially wanted to try skiing for the first time. The whole family was staying together in a big wooden chalet in the town of Queenstown, surrounded by snow-capped peaks. On the first night they all arrived, they cooked a big, hearty dinner together, played some board games in front of the fireplace, and enjoyed catching up on what they'd all been up to since they last saw one another. They had so much to talk about, and it was a truly joyful reunion. When they awoke the next day, it was time for them all to enjoy their vacation in their own way. Koko's parents and sister headed into town, while Auntie Shirley joined a hiking tour on an expedition up into the mountains. Kookai's parents would be taking the littlest koalas to the ski slopes. They led her and her cousin Koko towards the foot of a mountain range called the Remarkables. They were called this due to how impressively high and craggy they were, and how perfect they were for skiing. The koalas hopped on the ski lift and up they went into the mountains. First, they all went to the shop, where Koko picked up his snowboard, and young Kookai was fitted with her own first pair of skis. Then, Kookai was taken to enjoy her first ski lesson with an instructor on the nursery slopes. Despite Kookai's initial eagerness to learn how to ski, she couldn't help being distracted during her ski lesson. Every time she looked to the nearby snow-dusted slopes, she watched on as her older cousin Koko zoomed and skidded his way down the slopes. He superbly navigated his electric blue snowboard from side to side, winding his way through the snow at exciting speed until he reached the bottom of the slope and unclipped his feet from the board. There were lots of equally cool animals zooming down the mountain in skis, but Kookai was drawn to Koko's fancy skills. She wanted to be just like her older cousin. Once Kookai's ski lesson was over, she joined her parents and Koko in the cafe for some hot lunch. Koko carried his blue snowboard under one arm and his helmet under the other. He looked very cool in his snowsuit. Kookai wanted to look as cool as him. When they were all comfortably seated at the table devouring their lunches, Kookai turned to her older cousin and said sweetly, "Koko, you looked really cool on the slopes. You're a very good snowboarder. It looks like a lot of fun." Koko smiled graciously and replied, "It is a lot of fun. I love to go snowboarding whenever I can." Kookai asked Koko how long it had taken him to learn to snowboard, and Koko admitted that he had been practicing for quite a while, and he still had lots to learn. But he was getting better every time he practiced. Kookai pouted and looked at her skis propped up against the wall. "I wish I could snowboard like you," she muttered wistfully. Koko cast a look at Kookai's mum and dad, and they raised their eyebrows with amusement. Koko placed his hand on his little cousin's shoulder and suggested, "Well, why don't I try to teach you some moves? I'm not the best snowboarder, but I can teach you the basics at least." Kookai's little face perked up and her mouth spread into a big smile. "Oh, yes, please, Koko," she cried giddily. "I would love that." So it was settled. Once their lunches were all finished, they headed to the ski shop to swap Kookai's skis for a hot pink snowboard, and Kookai had never felt cooler. The snowboard was surprisingly heavy, and Kookai dragged it through the snow with her little paws, leaving a trail in the snow behind her. Noticing her struggle, Koko offered to help her carry it, and together they walked over to the ski lift queue to head back up the mountain. This time, it would just be Koko and Kookai heading up the mountain. Kookai's parents were going to wait at the foot of the mountain with a hot cup of coffee, and Koko was in charge of looking after Kookai for the afternoon. Koko promised that he would take good care of his cousin, and the two little koalas waved goodbye to Kookai's parents as they were carried away up the mountain on the ski lift. Kookai looked down at the snowy ground far below her as her little furry legs dangled over the edge of her seat. Sitting in the ski lift felt a little bit like flying. They could see for miles and miles around from up on the ski lift, and Kookai felt on top of the world. If every vacation was going to be like this, then she couldn't wait for all the other ones she had in store. Next to them on the ski lift were a friendly crocodile called Scales and a chatty Kiwi called Tia, and the four of them all chatted away as they floated up towards the top of the mountain. Scales the crocodile was from Australia and said that he had been coming to New Zealand for ski holidays every year ever since he was a young hatchling trying on his first pair of skis. Tia the Kiwi confessed that she didn't care much for skiing, but she just liked to come up here to admire the breathtaking views with a hot chocolate. "This is my first time learning to snowboard," Kookai admitted, before adding, "My cousin Koko here is going to teach me." The crocodile and Kiwi were very pleased to hear that Koko was so kindly offering to help her, and they wished Kookai the best of luck with her first day of snowboarding. Scales suggested, "If you want a proper snowboarding lesson at any point, then you must train with Kara, the Kia. She's lived in the mountains her whole life and is the best snowboarder around. Plus, she makes an excellent teacher." Koko and Kookai made note of Kara's name and thanked Scales for their advice. Their ski lift reached the top of the mountain, and the safety bar sprung up, allowing the 4 new friends to hop off and begin their afternoon. "Good luck, Kookai," Scales and Tia wished kindly to the little pink koala before going their separate ways. Eagerly, Kookai turned to Koko and asked with a sweet, optimistic face, "So where shall we start, Koko?" Koko patted the bright pink helmet on her head and suggested that they start by finding her balance on her board. That was the core of everything. So they trudged through the snow to a flat area where they could practice in peace. Koko showed Kookai how he clipped his boots into his snowboard and stood up straight. Then he performed a few little hops on the board to check that his feet were secured in place, and instructed Kookai to do the same thing. Kookai placed her tiny feet in position and wriggled them until they clipped into place. Then she tried to stand up tall, but promptly toppled over. Standing up was tougher than she thought. She tried again, but slower this time, and managed to wobble her way to standing. Koko smiled and said, "Now do a few little hops to make sure your feet are secure." Koko bent her knees and tried to lift off the ground, but the board was quite heavy and she barely moved an inch. She attempted to hop again, a little stronger this time, and the board lifted up into the air a little too high. Kookai stumbled to the ground yet again, landing in the soft, fluffy snow with a plop. "Oh dear," she muttered. "I'm not very good at this." Koko held out his hand to help her back up to her feet and reassured her. "Don't worry, you'll get the hang of it," he said. "It just takes practice." For the next hour, Koko patiently taught Kookai how to find her balance on her snowboard and how to push off and go from standing still. Keeping her balance while the board was moving was very hard at first, but once she had tried it a few times and learnt to bend her knees and trust in herself, Kookai found it much easier and she fell over less and less. Eventually, Koko thought that Kookai was ready to move onto a small slope to practice getting used to moving on the snowboard. They started on a slope no bigger than a molehill to begin with. Then, once Kookai had successfully skated down that one, they moved onto a slope the height of a small slide. With each small increment in height, Kookai struggled at first to keep her balance on each new slope, but quickly learned how to navigate the different inclines until she felt much more confident. In next to no time, she felt more stable and strong in her legs and was flying down the slopes with ease. She felt on top of the world and like the coolest koala around. Koko was a great teacher. Koko led Kookai to the top of another slope that was quite a bit taller, but he felt confident that she was ready to push herself that bit further. Kookai was so excited to finally have a go on one of the proper ski slopes. Before they set off, Koko suggested, "Watch me and observe closely how I move my body to glide down the hill." Koko set off on his snowboard down the small snow slope, and Kookai watched as closely as she could. Koko smoothly skidded over the snow, subtly leaning his body from side to change his course of direction. He created big, wide S shapes across the snow to slow himself down, and soon he was down at the bottom of the slope waiting for Kookai. He hadn't lost his balance once. He had made it look so easy. Kookai heard Koko call up the small slope to her. "Now it's your turn. Keep your feet planted firmly on your snowboard and breathe." Kookai hopped her board to the edge of the small slope, took a deep breath, and set off. As she started to skate across the slippery snow, she wobbled a little at first, and she felt like she was moving too fast. But then she remembered how Koko had leant his body ever so slightly from side to create the wide S shapes across the snow. She took a calming breath and leant to her right side. Amazingly, her snowboard started to move to the left, and her pace began to slow down. Next, she switched her body weight to the left side and watched as the snowboard beneath her feet turned and headed towards the right side of the slope. Kookai giggled with relief. She was doing it. She was snowboarding, just like Koko. She changed direction several times, drawing big S shapes in the snow, until she reached the bottom of the slope and came to a halt. Koko instantly started applauding her, and Kookai grinned with pride. "Wow, Kookai," Koko beamed. "You did that perfectly. I told you would get the hang of it." Kookai was very pleased with herself, and she wanted to do it again. She begged Koko, "Can we move onto a bigger slope now?" Koko chuckled and replied, "I think we should keep practicing on this small slope for a bit longer first. We don't want to get carried away and move too fast." Kookai understood, and they both unclipped their snowboards from their feet, carried them in their hands, and hiked back up the slope in their snow boots. As they reached the top of the small slope once more, Kookai looked at Koko and smiled, saying, "I hope that I become as good a snowboarder as you, Koko." Koko blushed and replied modestly, "I'm not that good a snowboarder, but thank you. If you want to be a great snowboarder, then you want to be like that bird over there." He pointed his furry finger up high towards a tall slope nearby. The snowy hill was taller than any that Kookai had ever seen, and it was narrow and thin, with spindly trees lining the edges all the way down to the bottom. Setting off from the top of the slope was a brave bird on a snowboard. The bird snowboarded down the mountain at great speed to begin with, and Kookai almost thought the bird might take off and fly away. Then, just like Koko and Kookai had been practicing, the snowboarding bird started to skate from side to side, drawing big S shapes in the snow to slow itself down a little. Then, out of nowhere, the bird lifted up off the ground to perform a spectacular flip in midair before landing its snowboard expertly back on the ground to continue its route down the mountainside. Koko and Kookai's jaws fell open with awe, and they couldn't take their eyes off the magnificent bird's snowboarding skills. Eventually, the bird reached the bottom of the slope and skidded to a halt with a flourish of its wing. Everyone around started to clap for the bird's impressive show, and the bird took a little bow in gratitude. Kookai and Koko turned to look at each other with amazement. Kookai gasped, "That was the coolest thing I've ever seen." Koko nodded his head and added, "Me too." Koko and Kookai attempted to get back on track with their snowboarding lesson, but they couldn't stop thinking about the amazing performance that the bird had put on. Kookai wondered who they were. Kookai snowboarded down the small slope a few more times, growing more confident in her maneuvering, and Koko gave her tips and pointers each time to get better. After her third successful attempt, Kookai and Koko sat down for a break, and they heard an unfamiliar voice speak to them from behind. The voice said, "Good work with your practicing. I can see that you're getting better each time and really applying what you're learning to perfect your technique. One day you'll be an excellent snowboarder if you keep that up." Kookai turned around to see who was talking to her and gasped with surprise when she saw who it was. Standing behind them, with a silver snowboard under her wing, was the bird that had so spectacularly skated down the tall mountain. Kookai and Koko felt starstruck. Kookai managed to stutter out a small, "Thank you," and the bird smiled. "My name is Kara," the bird said, and Koko and Kookai gasped with acknowledgement. Koko replied, "You're Kara the Kia? We've heard about you. I can see now why everyone says you're the best snowboarder around. You were amazing skating down that mountain." Kookai asked with amazement, "How did you do that flip?" Kara laughed humbly and replied, I learned how to do that after years of practice. Plus, I have a bit of an advantage as my wings help me to perform acts in midair." Kara explained that Kias live in the mountains, so they spend almost all their time skiing and snowboarding. And they love to have a bit of mischievous fun, so they spend plenty of time learning tricks and stunts too. Kookai listened to Kara with admiration. She'd never met anyone as cool as Kara. When Kookai was older, she wanted to grow up to be just like her, just maybe without the wings. Koko asked Kara what other tricks she could do. Kara thought for a moment and then replied, "Let me show you." Kara placed her feet on her snowboard and used her strong wings to fly herself back up to the top of the tallest ski slope. Once at the top, Kara planted her snowboard on the ground and set off back down the long snowy slope. Kara performed all sorts of impressive tricks and stunts for Kookai and Koko's entertainment. She spun on the spot and snowboarded backwards for a while. She twirled in midair before landing back on the ground and propelled herself off a ledge, held her snowboard in her wings, and spun in midair before landing gracefully into a final race towards the bottom of the mountain. It was an elaborate show. By the time Kara was done, Koko and Kookai felt breathless from just watching her. It was official. Kara the Kia was the best snowboarder in New Zealand. Kara strode over to Koko and Kookai, who were still sitting down, totally starstruck, after enjoying her performance. "Wow, Kara, that was incredible!" Koko exclaimed as she approached. "You are the best snowboarder ever," Kookai added with admiration. Kara smiled and bowed her head graciously before replying, "Well, if you ever would like a snowboarding lesson, I would be happy to offer you one." Kookai and Koko both nodded their heads eagerly and professed their interest. Kara offered to give them a lesson the next day, and Koko and Kookai could hardly contain their excitement. They were going to have a snowboarding lesson with the best snowboarder in New Zealand. They couldn't be happier. Kara instructed them both to meet her in the same spot on the mountain tomorrow for their lesson, before she bade them farewell and flew away to find a new slope to conquer. Koko and Kookai pulled themselves to their feet and sighed with satisfaction. What an amazing day it had turned out to be. The two koala cousins were starting to grow tired after all the excitement of the day, so they decided to head back down the mountain to the chalet. They dropped off their snowboards and helmets back at the shop and headed home, dreaming of drinking warm hot chocolates by the fire. When they arrived at the chalet, the whole family was sitting outside in the hot tub. The warm bubbles popped and sizzled in the tub, and the koala family laughed and talked beneath the starry sky. "Hello, Koko. Hello, Kookai," called out Auntie Shirley in a chirpy voice. "Did you have a nice time skiing today?" Kookai informed Auntie Shirley that they had actually been snowboarding, and they had had the most amazing time. In fact, they had enjoyed it so much that they were going back up the mountain to snowboard some more tomorrow. He gave his sister Kira a huge hug and said she would have to come too. Now it was her turn to learn to hit the slopes. The whole family were very impressed by Koko and Kookai's new hobby, and they suggested that maybe they all could join them up the mountain tomorrow. After all, it would be lovely to see the two koalas in action. Koko and Kookai looked at each other knowingly. When their family saw just how incredible Kara the Kia was at snowboarding, they wouldn't be paying attention to Koko and Kookai's skills much longer. The two koala cousins giggled between themselves and went to make themselves a hot chocolate. With their drinks in hand, they wandered back outside to join their family beneath the open night sky. The air was cool, but their mugs were warm, and with each sip of their drink, they felt cozier and snugglier. So snuggly, in fact, that they felt like they could drift off to sleep outside beneath the stars. Koko and Kookai listened to their family telling stories of their own exciting days exploring the area. It seemed like everyone had had a wonderful first day of their vacation, and Koko and Kookai had a strong feeling that they would feel the urge to venture up the snowy mountain for a spot of snowboarding a few times more. Get really comfy as I begin Dinky the Tiny Giraffe by Alicia Ainsley. Dinky was a giraffe. Dinky is a funny name for a giraffe, isn't it? Giraffes are anything but dinky. With their long necks that can reach up to the top of the trees and their tall, gangly legs that allow them to hover over the other animals, they are anything but dinky. But, alas, Dinky the giraffe was just that. He was a small giraffe calf. He hadn't grown up yet to be as tall and majestic as his mother, father, and their friends, but one day he would. Until then, he was simply the tiniest giraffe in Sleepy Forest. When I grow up big and tall, will everyone still call me Dinky? The young calf once asked his mother. She replied, "You can be called whatever you want people to call you. If you want, you can still be called Dinky, or you can change your name to something more grown up, like Harold or Ginger." Dinky chuckled at his mother's suggestions and said, "Oh no, those names are far too boring for me. I think I'll keep the name Dinky. I quite like it." His mother giggled back. "I agree. Dinky is a wonderful name." What Dinky lacked in height, he made up for in personality. He was a bit of a jokester and was always fooling around at school. He was the class clown and made all of his friends laugh all day long. Everybody enjoyed being around Dinky. But deep down, despite how much he liked his name and how fond he was of entertaining his friends, Dinky had a secret that he wouldn't admit to anyone. Dinky was tired of being so small. He watched all of the other giraffes slinking through the forest each day, garnering gasps of awe from the other animals they passed by, and eating the sweetest fruits at the top of the trees. He was a little bit jealous of them. Dinky was only big enough to reach the berries on the bushes down on the ground. He did like the berries he ate, but he longed to see what all the fuss was about at the top of the trees. Dinky knew that one day he would be big and tall like the other giraffes, but he was a little impatient. Sometimes, when nobody was looking, Dinky would try to speed up the growing process and take matters into his own hands. Once he tried to build himself a set of stilts to make himself taller. He gathered and chopped up 4 planks of wood, making sure that they were the same size as each other. Then he taped them to the bottom of his 4 feet and attempted to stand up on them. Standing on stilts was trickier than Dinky had expected, and he couldn't quite find his balance. He only took a few steps before the tape around his feet came loose, and he tumbled to the ground, landing in a pile of wood. But Dinky didn't let one failed attempt put him off. On another occasion, Dinky decided to try a totally different way of reaching the top of the trees. There were other animals in the forest who weren't anywhere near as tall as the adult giraffes, but they still managed to eat from the top of the trees. They could do this because they could climb. Dinky spent days watching the monkeys climb the trunks, swinging from tree to tree and hopping all the way up to the fruit on the highest branches. They made it look easy. So after watching them intently, Dinky decided to have a go for himself. He approached a tree, stood on his hind legs, and wrapped his front two gangly little legs around the trunk. Then he attempted to shimmy his way up the tree. He tried to clutch the bark, but his hooves were too smooth and they couldn't grip on. Every time he tried to climb a little bit higher, he slid back down to the starting point. He even tried to use his long neck to reach the branches, but his body was too heavy to hold on solely by his teeth. Despite how expertly the monkeys climbed and how effortless they made it look, climbing trees was far too difficult for Dinky the giraffe. Dinky tried more natural methods to grow quicker too. He knew that if he ate as many greens and vegetables as possible, then he would grow up to be big and strong. But no matter how many greens he ate, he continued to grow at a steady rate. As much as Dinky wanted to be tall already, he would just have to wait until he was older. One day, Dinky was taking a stroll through Sleepy Forest when he heard a little voice calling for help. "Hello, is anyone out there?" The meek little voice called out. Dinky followed the sound of the small voice all the way behind a crowd of bushes and discovered a tiny fairy tangled up in a cluster of wild ivy. The little tangled fairy looked up at Dinky with relief. "Oh, thank you for finding me," the fairy said gratefully. "I'm stuck. Please, can you help me?" Dinky wasted no time in helping untangle the tiny fairy from the twisted ivy vines. He chomped through the stubborn stems and freed the magical being. The little fairy was so grateful to Dinky for his help and introduced herself. "My name is Frisia," the twinkling fairy said. "What is your name, mighty giraffe?" Dinky giggled at the fairy's description of him. "My name is Dinky," he replied, before adding, "And I'm no mighty giraffe. I'm only small." Frisia the fairy looked up at him from her spot on the ground and responded with a shrug. "Well, you seem pretty mighty to me. Almost everyone in the forest is giant to me, especially you giraffes." Dinky smiled proudly for a brief moment. He liked being referred to as a giant, but almost as soon as the compliment had washed over him, it faded away as he remembered that he was only a small giraffe, really. Frisia the fairy suddenly looked concerned and started staring at the ground around her. Dinky asked what she was looking for, and she told him that she had lost her magic wand in all the kerfuffle with the ivy. She couldn't go anywhere until she had found her magic wand. Dinky and Frisia scanned the forest floor all around them for the wand. They searched in the bushes and checked it wasn't lying around on the ground. Dinky rifled through the ivy vines to see if her magic wand had become tangled up in them too, but he couldn't spot it anywhere. Dinky turned around to walk over to Frisia, who was now peering under a rock, when he bumped his head lightly into a low-hanging tree branch. As he recoiled from the bump, he noticed that something tiny and silver was perfectly balanced between a two-pronged stem of the branch. He inspected it closer and realized that it was a mini, silver magic wand. "I've found it! I've found your wand!" Dinky called out to Frisia with delight. He gently picked up the wand in his teeth and lowered it to the ground for Frisia to take. As soon as she held her wand in her hand again, it began to shimmer with glittering magic. "There you are, little wand. How did you get up there, in that tree?" Frisia spoke to the wand as if it could talk back. "It must have flown up out of my hand when I tripped over and fell in the vines." Frisia giggled at her clumsiness and gazed up at Dinky. "Thank you so much for your help," she gushed. "I would love to offer to grant you one wish as payment for your kindness." Dinky was surprised by her offer. He didn't expect anything in exchange for helping her in her time of need. He thought about rejecting her offer for a moment, but then a thought flashed through his mind. "Can you grant me any wish?" he asked curiously. Frisia nodded her head eagerly and responded, "Yes, of course. I can grant you any wish you desire, but just the one. So wish carefully and make it a good one." Dinky knew what he wanted in his heart. He wanted to be tall like the other giraffes, maybe even taller. He wanted to be the tallest giraffe in the world and know what it was like to tower above everyone and eat from the highest trees. He decided to make his wish. "Please, can I become the biggest giraffe in the world, just for one day?" he wished. "I want to know what it feels like to be not so dinky." Frisia held her sparkling silver wand up above her head and replied, "Your wish is my command." She swirled her wand around her head and flicked it with a twist of her wrist in Dinky's direction. Streams of sparkling silver light trickled out of the end of her wand and through the air, surrounding Dinky's entire body and making him sparkle with magic too. Dinky felt the magical beams of light tickle his skin as they seeped into his body. His whole body grew warm as the magic absorbed itself into his skin and rippled through his bones. All of a sudden, he started to notice big changes in his body. His legs started to grow below him, and his neck began to stretch. As his legs and neck shot upwards, he watched as the ground became further and further away, and Frisia the fairy almost disappeared out of sight. He could barely see what was on the forest floor anymore. It wasn't long before his head was as high as the top of the leafy trees. Dinky couldn't believe it. He was a tall giraffe, just like he had wanted. But he wasn't just a tall giraffe. He was a huge one, He was most definitely the biggest giraffe in the world. He heard a tinkling sound next to his ear, and he turned his head to see Frisia floating in the air, using her delicate wings. "Are you pleased?" she asked hopefully. Dinky was very pleased. He couldn't wait to see what he could get up to with his newfound height. He certainly wasn't Dinky anymore. Frisia reminded him that the effects of the spell would only last for one day, so when sunset came, he would return to his original size. That was fine by Dinky. He was going to make the most of this opportunity. Frisia wished him a wonderful day and whisked herself off home, leaving Dinky to enjoy his day as the biggest giraffe in the world. Dinky wasn't quite sure where to begin. There were so many things he had looked forward to doing when he was older and taller. But now that the time had arrived sooner than he had expected, he didn't know where to start. He wandered through Sleepy Forest, getting used to his new long legs. Every step that he took was the equivalent of 10 tiny steps he would have made earlier that day when he was shorter. If he desired to, he could travel anywhere he wanted in the blink of an eye. He could probably make his way all around Sleepy Forest in one day if he tried. Dinky decided to get used to his new legs first. He trotted to pick up the pace and was delighted by how thrilling the wind felt in his ears as he skipped along. He could hear the bird songs loud and clear. He could spot the squirrels scurrying between their nests and the red pandas lazing about in the treetops. He was seeing a whole new world up here at the top of the woodland. As he picked up his pace and began to gallop, he was enthralled by how fast he could move. He spotted a boulder in the distance and decided to count as he ran towards it. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4 Mississippi, 5 Mississippi, 6 Mississippi, 7 Mississippi. He pounded his long, gangly legs against the ground as fast as he could, and when he reached the boulder, he realized that he had run over to it in only 7 seconds. His speed surely broke all the world records. Dinky bet that even the speedy cheetah would struggle to keep up with his pace today. He paused to catch his breath and heard the muffling sound of a few familiar voices. He followed the voices and peered his head over the top of the trees to discover 3 of his good friends from school. Picking sweet berries from the bush were his friends Becky the hippo, Suki the snake, and Willoughby the wallaby. "Hey guys," Dinky greeted them from above. The 3 friends were startled at first by his sudden appearance, but their surprise soon turned into laughter and bewilderment as they realized it was Dinky. "Oh my, Dinky, you've grown fast," Becky the hippo exclaimed. Her eyebrows shot up so high to look at him that the red woolly hat she was wearing almost fell off her head. How did you get to be so tall, Dinky? Suki the snake asked in amazement. Have you had a growth spurt? Willoughby questioned with disbelief. Dinky chuckled and replied, Something like that. I met a fairy in the forest and she offered to grant me one wish. So I decided to wish to be the biggest giraffe in the world for the day. His three friends were astonished by Dinky's chance encounter. They wished that they had bumped into a wish-granting fairy on their travels. What fun things have you got up to since you've grown so tall? Willoughby the wallaby asked inquisitively. Willoughby was only a small animal, even when Dinky was his normal tiny size. Now that Dinky was so huge, he could barely spot his good friend. Dinky admitted that he hadn't done much of anything yet. He had only just said goodbye to the fairy, and he didn't know where to begin with all the fun activities at his disposal. Becky the hippo folded her arms and tapped the side of her head in thought. She had a great idea for how Dinky could put his new stupendous height to good use. She asked, Dinky, surely you are tall enough to reach the fruits at the top of the trees now? Please could you grab some of the fruit and bring it to the ground so that we can all try it? Suki and Willoughby nodded their heads in eager agreement. All four of the young friends had spoken about their longing for the fruits at the top of the trees so many times before. They had assumed they would have to wait until they all grew up to taste them. But now that Dinky had fast-tracked his growth spurt, their wishes could be fulfilled. Dinky craned his neck to look around for any fruit trees nearby. Luckily, there were some delicious banana trees nearby. He took 4 epic strides forward and reached the banana trees. He picked a bunch of bananas and carefully lowered them to the ground for his friends. Becky, Suki, and Willoughby all rushed over to see what he had picked. Wow, these are bananas, Becky declared with delight. I've only ever heard of monkeys being able to eat them before now. None of the other animals can reach them. Dinky smugly retorted, Well, now I can reach them. Becky, Suki, Willoughby and Dinky all tucked into the bunch of bananas. They peeled the rubbery yellow skin back and devoured the soft fruit inside. Wow, this fruit really is the best fruit ever, Dinky proclaimed as he munched away. The 4 friends were absolutely enamored with the delicious fruits, and they ate and ate until their stomachs were full of fruity goodness. Dinky's 3 friends lied down on their backs and patted their bellies with satisfaction. That was so yummy. I think I'm ready for a nap now, Willoughby sighed, closing his eyes. Becky and Suki agreed and closed their eyes to relax with their friend. But Dinky had other plans. He only had until sunset to enjoy being the biggest giraffe in the world, so he had to make the most of it. He whispered goodbye to his snoozing friends and strode his way through Sleepy Forest to enjoy the rest of his day. Dinky skipped happily through Sleepy Forest, his head bobbing above the treetops and his belly full of fruit. He had always wanted to know what the fruit at the top of the trees tasted like, and now he knew. The bananas had not disappointed him. Dinky eventually found himself in a dense, grassy clearing in the middle of Sleepy Forest. The sunlight was streaming down without any trees to cast shade on the ground, and, in the middle, Dinky noticed a mighty strong gorilla sunbathing. "Hello, Mr. Gorilla," Dinky greeted him. The hairy gorilla opened his eyes to see who had called to him and gasped when he saw Dinky. The gorilla sat up straight and commented in a deep, husky voice, "My, oh my, you might be the biggest giraffe I've ever seen." Dinky smiled proudly and introduced himself. The gorilla responded that his name was Thumper. "That's an unusual name," Dinky thought aloud. "Why are you called Thumper?" "You're one to talk," Thumper the gorilla answered back. "Why are you called Dinky when you're so tall?" Dinky giggled. Thumper had a point. It was rather silly of him to be called Dinky now that he was much taller than every other creature in Sleepy Forest. Thumper asked if Dinky would like to relax with him, and Dinky agreed. He was feeling quite full after eating so much fruit, and he was feeling pretty tired after walking for so long. Besides, it wasn't every day that a gorilla invited you to hang out with them. The gorillas didn't normally associate with many other animals. They tended to keep to themselves. As Dinky and Thumper sat in the grass and got to know each other, Dinky discovered why the gorillas tended to be solitary animals. Thumper explained. "Everyone thinks that because I'm so big, that I'm not very friendly. Not many animals want to play with me because I'm so much bigger than them. But I'm just the same as everyone else. I want to join in the fun, too." Dinky felt sorry for Thumper and replied, "Well, don't worry. I'll play with you. I'm even bigger than you are, so it's no problem for me." Thumper's eyes grew wide with pleasure. It had been a long time since anyone had wanted to play with him. Little did Thumper know that it would be a special occasion for Dinky, too. Dinky was usually too small to play with bigger animals like gorillas, but today he had the opportunity. The pair of newfound friends played together for hours. They chased each other, playing tag and hide and seek, although neither of them was particularly good at hiding. They learnt chants and practiced some hand clap games, and even choreographed a little dance together. They had a jolly good time. After a while, Thumper the gorilla grew tired and laid back down in the grass to enjoy the last of the day's sunlight. Dinky looked at the sky and became aware of how the day had slipped away from him. Sunset wasn't far off, and he only had a limited amount of time left as the biggest giraffe in the world. "I've got to go now," Dinky informed Thumper. "But I'll see you soon, and we can play together again. Although I might look a little bit different the next time you see me." Thumper waved goodbye to his new friend from his comfy bed in the long grass, and Dinky made his way back through Sleepy Forest. Dinky needed to make sure that he was close to home for when the sunset and bedtime came. He made his way through Sleepy Forest, feeling sleepier with every step. It took a lot of energy to move such a big body. Dinky's usual small frame was much lighter to carry. Something that Dinky had always wondered about was where the sun went when it set behind the mountain. Did the sun have a cozy bed in the sky that it disappeared into? Or did the sun live in a house hidden behind the mountain? Dinky wanted to find out, and today he had the perfect opportunity to do so. Dinky walked all the way to the base of the mountain, which the sun set behind every evening. The sun was already low in the sky and was beginning to slowly glide through the air, getting lower and lower with each passing minute. The bright blue sky was now purple, and the once bright white sun was now a creamy orange colour, flickering with only a few gentle pulses of light. Nighttime would soon be here, and Dinky would return to his normal mini size again. Despite how much fun he had had today, Dinky was looking forward to being himself again. One day, he would be as tall as all the other giraffes and be able to eat the high fruit and play with the bigger animals. But there were things that he liked about being small. He enjoyed eating the berries on the bushes that he was currently too tall to stoop down and search for. He liked playing with his friends, who were smaller in size to him. And he liked being as light as a feather. It meant that he could run around as much as he wanted without getting tired. Dinky watched the sun start to disappear over the side of the mountain, and he craned his neck to witness where it went. He was so tall that, with a bit of a push, he could see over the side of the mountain to what was on the other side. To his surprise, he didn't see a bed in the sky or a little house where the sun lived. He just saw a long stretch of land reaching all the way out to the sea. Dinky had never known that there was a sea near Sleepy Forest, but now he did. Although it would take a very long time to walk there. Dinky continued to watch the sun as it floated down through the sky and disappeared over the horizon, past the furthest point of the sea. Darkness fell upon Sleepy Forest and the land beyond, and Dinky let out a big yawn. He looked down at his body. expecting to see it shrink, but it was exactly the same as before. He was still the biggest giraffe in the world. How was he going to fit into his bed if he stayed the same size all night? But just at that moment, a familiar voice appeared out of nowhere. He turned his head to see Frisia the fairy fluttering her wings next to him. "Hello again, Dinky," she greeted him. "Have you had a good day? Did you like your wish?" Dinky nodded his head and let out another big yawn. He had had a wonderful day, all thanks to her magic. Frisia was pleased to hear that he had enjoyed it, and asked him if he would like to stay as the biggest giraffe in the world for an extra day. She would be happy to grant him one more wish if he wanted it. Dinky was grateful for her offer, but he politely declined. He missed being his little old self, and all that he wanted, more than anything right now, was to curl up in his comfy small bed with his parents. Frisia smiled, waved her wand in the air, and gently tapped the top of Dinky's head. Sparkles of light fluttered across his head, trickled down his neck, spread over his body, and cascaded all the way down his tail and legs to his feet. His body felt warm and fuzzy, and he closed his eyes as his body felt like it was melting into a puddle. Dinky was his small self again. He thanked Frisia for her generosity, and she wished him good night before flying off into the night sky. Dinky made the short walk home to his family, yawning all the way. When he eventually reached his home, his mother had already prepared his bed for him, and his father had brewed him a cup of hot chocolate, just like always. But Dinky was so tired tonight that he didn't need a drink. He promptly kissed his parents on the cheek and snuggled himself into his beloved bed. His mother tucked him under the duvet covers and kissed his forehead. Dinky wondered whether he would tell his parents about his magical adventure in the morning. They might think he was just dreaming it all up. But Dinky knew the truth. He had enjoyed a taste of what it would be like to be a tall giraffe, and one day he would enjoy those escapades every day. But for now, Dinky was perfectly content being his young, mini self, enjoying all of the fun, special things that he only got to do while he was a child and dinky in stature. The Littlest Frog's Longest Race by Jane Thomas. Deep in the heart of Sleepy Forest, in the place where the fireflies shine the brightest, there sits a lily pond. And on that lily pond, on a leaf that drifts close to the reed beds, lives a little frog called Fritz. He's the tiny frog with the huge heart, who calls out good morning to every other animal, however big or small they are, and is cheerful and kind and friendly with everyone. About a mile away, which is a terribly long way when you're a frog quite so tiny as Fritz, there's another pond. It is long and narrow and sheltered from the winds and breezes by the tallest reeds in the forest. The surface is barely ever disturbed by a single ripple. It is a place that is particularly perfect for two things. The first of those is for families to bring their littlest swimmers when they're first learning the ways of the water. So you'll often find tiny frogs, ones who've only just grown out of being a tadpole, splishing and splashing their way along the edges. The second thing that the pond is perfect for is racing. Animals of all kinds come here to race through the still perfectly straight waters, charging from one end to the other, and sometimes back again and again and again, rushing to see who can be the fastest. Oh, and there's actually a third thing the pond is good for too, but it's only on very rare occasions this one happens. Albatrosses need a lot of space for taking off and landing, and this pond provides the ideal setting for them. A natural runway that just keeps going and going, and is usually long enough for the visiting albatrosses to come to a stop or head off into the skies above Sleepy Forest. Whenever there are swimming sessions for the little animals, or whenever there are races on the pond, lifeguards sit along the side a few meters apart. Otters are, of course, some of the finest, sleekest, swiftest swimmers in all the world, and they make the perfect lifeguards, sitting high on stone towers and scouring the pond for any little ones who stray too far from the edge. Today, there's going to be a race on the pond. The posters have been up for weeks, carefully painted onto large leaves and hung from reeds and twigs throughout the forest. There are multiple different divisions, as this is the biggest race day of the year. So otters and swans and frogs and fish and every kind of swimming animal you can name will be heading to the pond. Since it is the biggest race day, everyone puts a little more effort into their outfits. Many of the ladies and girls like to wear fancy hats, and they can spend weeks creating them, weaving fruit and feathers into the finest vines and leaves. It's the sort of occasion when those who have pocket watches will add them to their waistcoats, and they look for any excuse to take them out, just so everyone can say, "Ah, there is a gorgeous gold pocket watch on a gorgeous gold chain." It is perhaps unsurprising that a hare, distantly related to the hare who helped a certain young lady called Alice when she fell down a rabbit hole, is the official timer for the races that take place. The little frog Fritz isn't going to appear in any of the races this year, but he's going to cheer on his cousin Philomena. She is, and it is barely believable that this is possible, but it's absolutely true, even tinier than Fritz himself. Philomena is a dainty little frog who's been practicing her swimming strokes for months now. She knows just how to push against the water with her legs and pull against it with her arms, rising and falling with her body as she rushes forwards. She can spread out the webbing on her hands and feet and pull and push as much water as possible with every stroke. The day before the race, Philomena's mother takes her to one side to offer some words of wisdom. She sits Philomena down in front of her and makes sure the little frog is watching her face closely as she speaks. And she tells a story that has been told thousands of times the whole world over, of a hare and a tortoise and their famous race. She tells of how the hare was the fastest animal in all the land, and how he could easily win the race, and knew that he could too. She tells of the hare setting off and disappearing into the distance, leaving the tortoise easing slowly through the dust the hare left behind. She tells her how the hare looked back from the top of a hill and realized the tortoise was nowhere in sight, and the hare settled down in the shade of a tree to sleep a while in the sunshine. It is, after all, so very easy to fall asleep when the warm summer sun comes trickling down between the leaves of a tree, and gentle breezes carry the scents of lilac and lavender, and there's a soft mound of moss that makes a perfect green pillow. But the tortoise is wise because he never stops going forwards. And at one point, he passes the hare, sleeping soundly in the shade of the tree, and wonders, just for a moment, if he might win the race after all. And he wonders, just for another moment, if he too might take a break and curl up inside his shell, cozy and warm with the summer sun. But he knows that he must keep pressing forwards. And so Philomena's mother finishes, making sure throughout her story that little Philomena is carefully watching her as she speaks. The tortoise manages to win the race, and the hare is left feeling foolish. Even though you are tiny, dear Philomena, don't lose hope, her mother says. There will be bigger frogs with stronger legs and longer arms, but keep on going, keep on pushing, and you will do well out there tomorrow. Little Philomena fell asleep that night, curled up on her lily pad beneath a blanket of the softest, downiest fluff of the bulrushes, dreaming of the race and paddling her little arms and legs in her dreams. Fritz and his friends decided to visit Philomena the following morning, to wish her good luck in the race and to let her know they would be waiting for her at the finishing line. Fritz was sure to tap his cousin on the shoulder and turn her face to his as he spoke, careful to check that she was watching him as he whispered of her courage and strength. They went together as a group towards the racing pond, moving slowly across the mile of sleepy forest that divided where they lived and where she would compete. And as they hopped their way over tree stumps and around drooping green ferns and hedgerows bursting with roses and honeysuckle, they met other animals who were also heading to the pond. This year, it turned out, it wasn't just animals from Sleepy Forest who were going to compete. The pond had become so famous for its length and straightness and stillness that other animals came from far and wide to join in the races. And so, Philomena and her family and friends met other creatures from places like Dreamy Dell and the Floating Clouds, and even the village of Lower Starry Skies. Philomena waved shyly to these unknown animals, who all waved shyly back and shared smiles and thumbs ups. And everything was wonderful on the beautiful, sunshine-dappled day, until animals from the wacky woods appeared. As they started to stream past Philomena and her group, the animals of the wacky wood pushed closer and closer, gawping at the tiny frog who hopped slowly from stone to stone, careful not to twist an ankle or hurt a wrist before the big race. "You are so tiny," they called out. "You don't stand a chance of winning. Just sit on the sidelines with us." Philomena looked straight ahead and kept on hopping. In her mind, she replayed the story of the hare and the tortoise her mother had told her the night before. It was as if she didn't notice the animals of the wacky wood at all, and this made them call out even more. "Why bother racing when you're so small?" they called. "Your entire body could fit into my hand," another said, concern in their voice. But it was as if Philomena was in another world, all by herself, looking ahead to the reeds and stones and path, and hopping perfectly between each. As Fritz was about to tell the animals of the wacky woods to mind their own business, a shadow came over the group, and the swoosh of wings filled the air. Philomena, feeling the shade on her back, turned to look up and saw a huge, glorious white swan gliding down towards them. The swan landed awkwardly, in the way swans do, her big yellow feet slipping and sliding on the muddy ground. She lowered herself gently, and Fritz hopped over, quick to greet his friend. "Penny," he called, and the swan grinned at him, her black eyes bright and sparkling in the sunshine. "Fritz, I hope to find you here. Listen, it's no good for your cousin to have to hop the whole mile before she has to race. Why don't I give you all a lift on my back?" Fritz showed all the frogs how to hop onto the soft white back of Penny, and just where to nestle so they could be safe between her wings. And once they were all on board, he called forward to Penny that they were ready. She spread her wings and flapped them up and down, up and down. Penny floated on the breeze, her wings straight by her sides and tilting this way and that to fly with ease through the warm air. From high above, Philomena could see animals coming towards the pond from all directions. She saw badgers and foxes coming from the north, and sheep and horses coming from the east, and beavers and moles coming from the south. And from the west, she even saw kingfishers and koalas making their way through Sleepy Forest. Philomena smiled to see the koalas yawning and stretching, and almost seeming to nap every few steps. But she loved that they too were determined to make it to race day. When they arrived at the racing pond, guided onto a runway by a rabbit who held 2 carrots and waved them to show the swan where to land and where to park, it was a scene like nothing Philomena had ever known before. A huge red and white striped tent had been strung between the oak trees, and inside there were stalls piled high with food and drink the little frog had never known. Philomena's mother took her hand and guided her towards a check-in table, letting the very serious badger in charge of operations know that she was there and would be ready to race. The badger explained that all competitors were asked to wear swimming hats with their names on, so that other animals could call out from the side and shout words of encouragement. And Philomena's mother looked at him a little oddly, and the badger, for a moment, seemed embarrassed. Philomena was too busy staring at the other competitors who were all warming up and stretching to notice any of the awkwardness, and only asked her mother for a hat as everyone else seemed to be wearing them. Her mother pulled a smart blue hat from her bag and pulled it onto Philomena's head, nodding and smiling to let the little frog know that it fitted just so. One of the creatures from the wacky wood passed Philomena and called again that she was too small and couldn't possibly win the race. But Philomena focused on her mother and the hat and the thumbs-ups from the creatures of Dreamy Dell and the floating clouds. They stood and watched the start of the next 3 races, with Philomena carefully watching to see how everyone climbed onto the starting blocks, and then, at the same time, launched themselves into the pond and charged forwards, thrashing and churning the water, and creating ripples and waves where normally there were none. At the far end, a terribly long way away indeed, she could just about see Fritz and his friends, and Penny was tall and regal above them, with her long, elegant neck, nodding her way up and down to show Philomena she could see her too. Philomena tugged her mother's hand and pointed to the starting block at the far side of the lineup, and her mother nodded. Yes, that would be her place to go. Finally, it was Philomena's turn. Animals from all over were in the lineup with her, and Philomena found herself alongside a very large frog from the wacky woods. He made some comments about her size and how easy it would be to beat her to the other end of the pond. But she was too busy looking at the water to notice that he said anything at all. When they climbed onto the starting blocks, all of the frogs looked straight ahead, looking exactly where they would need to go. Only Philomena, little Philomena, looked to the side, focused on the large frog from the wacky woods, who only moments before had said such mean things to her. As she watched the large frog's leg muscles start to twitch and launch himself into the pond, Philomena pushed herself forwards with all her might and threw herself into the water. She closed her eyes and shut out the rest of the world, feeling the water rush against her face as she pushed with her legs and pulled with her arms. It was a long pond and a long race, and she focused on her breathing, taking care to breathe out long and slow, pushing the breath from her body for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 strokes. Because Philomena had her eyes closed, and because she was so tucked away into her own watery world, it came as something of a surprise to her when her little webbed hand suddenly touched the end of the pond. She looked up into the face of Fritz, who was leaping and hopping and smiling at her as if he might jump as high as the swallows that swooped and danced in the sky. Philomena glanced to her side and watched as 7 other hands reached towards the end of the pond. She watched as 7 heads emerged from the water and looked to either side to see where they had come. And in that moment, Philomena realized she had won the race. The big frog from the wacky woods was the first to come over to Philomena Hey, he called. Well done. How did you do that? Philomena kept smiling at Fritz and waving to Penny, and watched as her mother hopped as fast as she could to come and give her a hug. Oi, the big frog called. I'm saying well done. Philomena saw only the huge bouquet of forest flowers that Fritz's friends presented her with, and then felt the weight of a medal being hung around her neck on a beautiful red ribbon. The big frog tapped her on the shoulder, and Philomena wheeled round. Listen, the big frog said, and Philomena looked straight at him. I wanted to say, well done. Really good effort. But how did you do it? How did you win when my friends and I were all so horrible and said all those mean things to you? How did you ignore us so well? Philomena shrugged and smiled at him. It was easy, she said slowly and a little awkwardly. But you weren't put off? It's really hard to ignore people saying you can't do something after all, insisted the big frog. Yes, said Philomena. I'm sure it is, but you see, I'm deaf, so I didn't hear anything you said anyway. The big frog slapped his knee and laughed. That explained it all. It explained why he had seen Philomena's friends take care to make sure she was looking at them when they spoke, and why the badger had seemed awkward talking about the swimming hat, and why the little frog had looked across to him to know when the race should start. And the big frog wondered what he might be able to do if he, too, could ignore those who said that he wasn't able to do something. That night, as Philomena curled up asleep beneath the blanket of soft down of the bulrushes, she remembered the moment of reaching the end of the pond and looking to the side and winning the race. And she smiled to herself as she disappeared into her dreams, filled with memories of the dancing fireflies that guided them home, and the feel of the drums in her feet through the forest floor, and the soft winds that filled the air as Penny flew off into the night. Her huge white wings pushing her towards the moon and the stars and the sky.